What's up? We got another Kiwiears today, the ETUDE, and it's got a new special vibrational driver called the KVTs, and you're either gonna love this or you're gonna hate this. First of all, does the driver actually work? Yes, it's actually pretty noticeable, but just not in the way that you would expect it. For example, when you hear the word vibrational, you think of like rumble, impact, or like an actual shaking feeling to the bass, like a subwoofer or something like that. However, that is not what we got. The ETUDE doesn't have like more rumble or shake than a normal IEM, but instead it has more reverb, echo, and like decay, prolonged decay to the bass. The best way I can put it is that the bass feels bouncier, the notes decay and linger longer after the impact, and it has this like echoey and reverby effect. For example, tracks with a heavy rhythmic section has this echo to the drums, to the hits, kind of like this. The ETUDE gives off a more bouncy and reverb presentation to the sound, and it adds an extra layer of nuance to the bass texture while not being overdone. It's subtle but just enough in the low end, and in my opinion it does increase the dynamics in the bass. Guitar strings, for example, on Pasano Diaz has an extended reverb and echo to the pull of the strings. It doesn't sound overdone, and it adds that extra bit of decay and nuance to the texture. But even though the ETUDE adds that extra bit of special sauce in the low end, the coherency with the rest of the FR does still need some work. Going back to Pasano Diaz, even though the guitar strings sound extra vibrational, so does the vocals, but in a bad way. The prolonged decay from the KVT drivers does bleed into the vocals and the mid-range a bit. It adds that extra echo and reverb to the singers, kind of like a badly implemented reverb filter on the vocals. This is especially noticeable on less busy tracks like acoustics, vocals, ballads like Pasano Diaz, which only has 2 or 3 instruments I believe, and it does take me out of the music a bit as soon as I hear that echoey reverb effect. Now on busier rock and pop tracks, you don't really notice it too much because the vocals are more pushed back, it's not isolated, and the echo does blend in better with the rest of the instruments. And similarly with like classical, jazz, or instrumentals, the ETUDE does sound very enjoyable on those because they're just like no vocals or very little vocals. The reverb does add a nice texture and character to the instruments, and you also don't hear the reverb in the treble, so you don't really get hit by that negative timbre. There's also a very noticeable echo in the shell. Like even when I'm talking, I can hear it echoing in the shell, and when you tap on it, you can evidently hear the bounciness, the echo, or like when you climb your teeth like this, you can still hear the echo. You also hear the driver stop and linger on with that reverb and echo just by pressing the pause and play button. So yeah, again, the driver does work. Now, even though the ETUDE is fun and enjoyable, it's different in the low end. Depending on your library, the echo and reverb can get annoying and unnatural. For example, you can still hear the vocal reverb even on Model, which is a busier rock track. So if you listen to a lot of ballads, indie vocals, I would probably pass on these because the echo does become very noticeable the less instruments there are, and it just ends up becoming like a bit gimmicky, a bit distracting. However, if you're using this for the bass, you just want to experience the KVT driver and how that affects the low end, and your library fits the sound that ETUDE excels on, then these are a pretty fun and pretty great pick. Tip-wise, I'm using the Velvet de Venus or the ASTRAL Sednas, but anything that gives you a tighter seal or increases the low end will work. The only tip I would not recommend for these are the foam tips because they just don't seal as well as the silicone ones. So just go with something that fits and that seals well. Scaling wise, these are decent. I got them around 75 to 80 dBs depending on the song, slightly behind the Odysseys because the vocals are more forward on the ETUDE. It does get a little bit shoutier, just because it's more forward, especially on K-pop and J-pop. You can't really crank it up on those stuff. And I did still notice a bit of that reverb on the vocals from Luna, Yorushika. So again, the driver does work, but maybe a bit too well. Tech-wise, the ETUDE is solid. It's not a value monster or anything. It doesn't have the air, the micro details, the layering like the Astrals, the Metas, the Septet of the world, but it is enough and it sits around the Odyssey's level. If it's priced around $200, I think it is competitive. I think it's like a decent value, especially given the extra bass texture you get with the KVT drivers, but just make sure your library is a good fit. Now versus the Performer 5+2, the ETUDE sounds very similar and grasp very similar, but it's just bassier. It's obviously gonna be better in the bass texture. You have the KVT drivers, the decay, the reverb, the bounciness is gonna be better in the bass. The treble is also smoother, it's less sharp, it scales better than the 5+2, and it does feel more natural overall in the treble as well. But the only trade-off is you do have that, you know, unnatural timbre in the vocals on the Etude. Overall, I would put the Etude slightly higher than the 5 Plus suite because it is better in the bass, it's smoother in the treble, it scales better, it doesn't sound as like clinical and monitor like as the 5 Plus suite, but the vocals are a bit unnatural, so it kind of like takes a point off. But aside from that, I do like this more than the 5 Plus suits. Then versus the Odysseys, the Etude is slightly more V-shaped than the Odysseys, so it has that extra bounciness and reverb in the low end. In terms of scaling, the Odysseys are still better, just you can crank it up a bit more, it's fuller, doesn't have that like V scoop in the lower mids, it's less shouty as well, a little bit bassier, and it does have more impact and thickness to the low end versus the more like bouncy and echoey reverby effect on the Etude. Both of these are side grades to one another. Personally, I like the Odysseys a little bit more because it does have a heavier slam, it feels a bit fuller, vocals are more natural, scales better, but the Etude is worth a listen if you want to try the new KVT drivers, which is pretty unique. Now versus the Astrals, for most people I would recommend the Astrals because it's just the better all-rounder, it's more natural sounding, it has better resolution, better detail, more spacious, has more rumble in the sub bass, like it's just a better overall package without the unnatural vocals on top. The only reason you would get the Etude over the Astral is number one, if you want to try the new driver, which is a very reasonable demand, and it does have that special sauce in the low end, so I get that. Or number two, if you want something bassier that scales better, then the Etude would be a better fit than the Astrals. Then versus some other Kiwiears stuff, if you want something that's brighter leaning, something airy, sparklier, cleaner, but still full and not thin sounding, then that would be the Septet. The low end isn't going to be on the same level as the Etude, however, in terms of just detail, air, layering, like overall sense of space, the Septet does do better in that regard. It's a better pick when it comes to acoustics, indie, ballads, you know, more natural in the vocals, whereas the Etude is going to be better for hip-hop, rock, you know, jazz, metal, and especially when it comes to texture in the low end. And compared to the Quintet, if you want a cleaner, more vocal-centric set without the echo and reverb in the vocals, then that's where the Quintet comes in. It's more detailed, it has better separation, it's sharper in the imaging, it doesn't scale as well as the Etude, it's not going to feel as natural and smooth in the treble, but it is going to be better when it comes to the vocals. As for the Orchestra Lite, the newer version I got is a V-shape. I don't really recommend it. The Etude is more enjoyable than the Orchestra Lite, even though the vocals do sound more echoey. The Orchestra Lite just sounds too shouty, too nasally. It's, you know, unnatural in a different sense. And overall, this has better bass texture as well. So I'll just take this over the Orchestra Lite, unless you can get the older version, which is like more clean, more balanced, more, you know, mid-centric. Then you could give that a shot if you want something cleaner. We also have some other options when it comes to vocals. There's the EPZ P50 for something neutral and balanced, the Tangent Origin for a thicker tonality, better for male vocals, and the Kaneza 4 for that sweet, airy female vocals. And if you don't care for that bounciness and reverb effect in the low end and you just want something that has more bass than the Etude, you know, something that has a heavier slam, then you have the Estrellas, which is sparkly, dynamic, with a lot of sub-bass rumble. You got the Dischinkos for a more mid-bass, thicker playback, heavier slam, and then you got the Deuce for a bass head, subwoofer level, like quantity set that will shake your ears better than the Etude. So there are definitely a lot of options out there. I would give the Etude a half recommendation depending on your library and the track, because although the KVT driver is a welcome addition, it does work pretty well. It just needs a little bit more refinement and better control when it comes to the mid-range. Again, these sound great when it comes to hip-hop, rock, R&B, jazz, even some like pop tracks like Birds of a Feather sounds very good on these. Instrumentals sound great on these, but it can take you out of the immersion with the vocals once everything is stripped bare. The Etude is a great collector's piece if you want to try something different, but if you're looking for an upgrade or like a balanced all-rounder set, try the Astrals and Odysseys instead. Those would be a better fit for most people. Anyhow, thanks for watching, guys. I hope this review is helpful. Interesting stuff coming out from Kiwiears. I do hope they keep it up. We do need more innovation in this like redundant, saturated market. But that is all for now. Give these a shot if you want to try something different, something unique, and I'll see everyone in the next one. Shout out to Dom Q, Roark's Cat, Mystic Spoon Attack, B Urak, Discal Scaldus, Walker Standard, Patrick, User, Mr. Gorillas, Polly J, Anton Risto, Gising Yon, Christopher Jackson, Name, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, Obi, Wizard, Frickalicious, Tapis R contained guava juice gains, Trent Bakeley, Forever New, Chuckle Norris 420, FKSRG, Treble Well Extended, 777 ZK, Cousin Fat, Oh Really, Giorgio's, Anthony, Julius Phillip, Dead Riddle, Bilha, Zane, Tamat, and Art Moore. Thank you guys so much.